Today, we have special guests with us. We have Denny Haiphong as well as Jackson Hinkle with us today. We are going to be discussing the imperialism, race, and labor movement. So, this is some of the topics we're going to be discussing in relation to a general and strike summit. I would love to say hello to everybody who's in the chat and everybody who's in the audience. Start off with Danny. How are you doing today?
I'm doing all right, everyone. It's good to be with you, James. Good to be with you, everyone.
All right. Jackson, how's it going today, dude?
I'm doing very well. I'm so glad to see the success of the summit, and despite all the haters, you guys are doing a great job, and I love to see it. And thank you for doing it, because it's hard work to get everyone together, but it's needed.
Yeah, we're tired. So Josana, my love, my dear, how are you doing? I know you've been around for the last 24 hours.
It feels like we are roommates. It's good. It's great to be here. I had a wonderful day yesterday. I got to learn so much, JB. And if it was to like anything to happen, I'm a different person now. I'm a different kind of activist. And as a foreigner, I got to learn so much more about this country, and that just gives me more reasons to keep on the fight. And yeah, I'm very excited.
Great. So one of the things that we wanted to talk about, and I know that part of this was what you wanted to talk about, Danny. You wanted to talk about the part about imperialism and how it relates to workers. If you can, please, what did some of the things that you wanted to highlight in relation to a general strike?
Well, there's a lot of things that we need to highlight when it comes to the subject of imperialism and its relationship, particularly to the working class in the United States. And first and foremost, I think what's really important to highlight is that the United States is an empire. I mean, we heard Max say that in part one, but I think what often is missing is a connection. And unfortunately, the labor movement is not really in a position to do this right now, which is to connect the fact that the United States continues to increase its military budget at the expense of working people all over the world, but especially working people in the United States. The US has just signed off on a $750 billion defense budget, which we know adds up to trillions upon trillions of largely unaudited dollars that are wasted towards endless wars. And that money is actually the surplus, because not only are tax dollars surplus, but also the pressure that employers are putting on workers is due in part because of the fact that the government, the United States government, the state, under this capitalist order actually doesn't provide for anything at all in the United States, right? I mean, we're at the point where we're talking about trying to catch up to Europe, which Europe is conducting its own austerity regime and cutting its own welfare state down to the barest of bones. So this is the particular position we're in, and it is so important to understand that the endless wars that the United States wages abroad has a direct relationship with the precarity that working people are facing at home, and that the United States' wars abroad reinforce the racism and the white supremacy that are at the foundations of the United States' particular capitalist system, which only serves to divide the working class and ensure that the employing class, the ruling class, is able to continue its path of exploitation, its path of destruction furthermore and ongoing. And this has been a particular historical issue in the U.S. labor movement in particular, and one that I've been a part of 3 unions myself. And you always confront the question of race in the class struggle. It is one, and you always confront the fact that the United States is continuing to militarize at the expense of working people. And so, and that includes the domestic surveillance program, which disproportionately, of course, affects Black people and working class people of color. but it has been universalized. And that's one thing that's not really talked about, is that this domestic surveillance state has been universalized to affect all working people. And so actually our class interests are much closer than they have been across racial lines in a very long time. But we still have this problem where the Democratic Party, as the party of endless war, of American exceptionalism, of imperialism, continues to exploit and co-opt the politics of race in a kind of race-only politics, which only serves to empower corporations, Wall Street, the military industrial complex, at the expense of everyone. And it continues this pattern of this American imperial decline that we're seeing on the world stage. And without acknowledging this, without having fruitful discussion, political education, and without understanding and talking about this on the shop floor, in workplaces, wherever you are, it is very difficult to unite working class people in the United States around common interests.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for that. Now, just as a question to you and Jackson as well, can you expound on the importance of worker solidarity, not just broadly in the national perspective, but also internationally?
Sure. Jackson, do you want to begin? Oh no, he's muted. I think
you're muted. Hang on.
Thank you. I did want to. I liked everything Danny said, and it is true that imperialism not only hurts the worker here, but also the worker across the globe. And something that's oftentimes forgotten is like that. There's this notion that there's such thing as like a just war, and not to get like too idealistic, but I think we all know that even in like World War II, 65% of the deaths in World War II were civilian deaths. So I think it's important to note that even in these so-called like just wars, right, where you're supposed to be like fighting for like the higher moral cause, the righteous wars, whatever, they still result in civilian casualties, civilian suffering, worker suffering. And that can also, of course, be seen through like all of the economic warfare, regime change warfare, surveillance warfare that Danny brought up. So wanted to echo all of that. But yeah, Danny, you want to address that point, and then we can all discuss that. I think it's a good question, but whoever wants to talk next.
Yeah, well, worker solidarity. I mean, this is also a matter of historical memory. And I wrote a book about American exceptionalism where we talk a lot about how the ruling class, this corporate ruling class, the capitalist class, they have an intense interest in erasing the historical memory of class struggle, and how class struggle has always been a matter of uniting working people against imperialism, against capitalism, and for a socialist future. And so this is not something that doesn't have historical context. I mean, in the United States in particular, worker solidarity at the height of the labor movement in the United States, when we're talking about the 20s, 30s, the 30 years crisis in the United States, you had millions of workers, really led by the Communist Party of the United States, organizing across industries, shutting down entire industries, steel, rubber, auto plants, the mills in North Carolina, Alabama. We can go down the line. There were millions of workers, and these workers were organizing to also oppose Jim Crow, because that's one of the central features of the best of the Communist Party in the United States in terms of its struggle, is that they took the lead from the Soviet Union. And we can't talk about that in the United States. We can't talk about the communism word, right? But the Soviet Union, it was Vladimir Lenin and the Soviet Union's ability to internationalize what is called the national question and the struggle of the colonial people, the colonized and oppressed all over the world, including within the capitalist countries, all of which have taken part in brutal forms of, imperialism and colonialism. it was that which really did inspire the Communist Party of the United States to take up this question. And I love Josanna's cat, but to take up this question in a very serious way and unite in attempt to not just treat Black workers as just members of the working class, but understanding, as W.E.B. Du Bois did and so many others, that there's an intimate connection between race and class. There's an intimate connection between the colonized and workers all over the world in the colonizing countries in order to have a real global socialist movement. And it was really partly that ideological understanding which helped ensure that these large scale industrial strikes could occur, because it gave a theoretical weapon, it gave a real theoretical foundation to working people to be able to tackle. I mean, imagine in the 1920s, 30s, at the height of Jim Crow, at the height of the lynch mob era, you had white workers, Black workers coming together in industrial strikes around common interests, while you also had an organization like the Communist Party saying, this is an important issue. And if we're going to win anything, if we are going to have a socialist future, we need to tackle this question seriously. I believe we need a political vehicle in a similar way right now in order to develop that kind of worker solidarity, which is, to me, what I think is really missing. It's this organization, right? We're trapped in the Democratic Party's vice grip, right? The Democratic Party is sending all of these social movements to die. It's I write for Black Agenda Report. It sent the Black Liberation Movement to a very brutal grave. It sent the labor movement into a point of crass collaborationism with the employer class. It sent the environmental movement down this kind of green liberalism, green bombs pathway. It sent all of these movements, at least the mainstream variants of them, because of course we know there's a very heroic minority doing the real work, but the mainstream elements of these movements have been co-opted by the Democratic Party. And that's why we at Black Agenda Report are always talking about the need to get out of the Democratic Party, to exit the Democratic Party in order for more room to exist for independent working class organization.
Very good. I just wanted to include Josanna on this conversation because Josanna, for all intents and purposes, you are an immigrant. You had migrated here to the United States. You came here from Brazil. As far as your experience in seeing workers and how they're treated in Brazil, how does that square with what we see here in the United States?
Sorry. Well, the difference is an abyss. Like, it's enormous. Like, we've had the military government imposed by the USA in the 70s, right? And then sorry, I have cat hair all so then you have the Constitution of 1988 that is inspired by the Constitution that was post French Revolution. So you have items in the constitutions and paragraphs that say education is universal and for all at no cost, housing, food, universal health care. So we have those things in our constitution, and workers' rights too. So the differences are, I've never, when I started working here and I realized that if I get sick, that's the day of work I'm losing. There's no support. That was the first shock. And also no paid vacation. No, and I don't have children, but saw co-workers that were like pregnant and worried about there's no maternity leave. If they leave, they are worried because the company is already threatening them that somebody else is going to take over that spot. There's no paid sick leave. So like, I realized that the work relations in the U.S. are more slavery relations.
Yeah.
So you work, you pay taxes, you have no infrastructure structure, sorry for my English, coming out of your taxes,
Mm-hmm.
and you don't get nothing in return. There are people though that believe that the tax return is something that you get in return,
Mm-hmm.
but there's actually nothing. So nothing is put back to the citizen that is working to keep the system working.
Mm-hmm.
And I totally agree with Danny. The foundation of the work rules and everything in the US is white supremacy, because the foundation of white supremacy is one group dominating the rest of the groups.
Yes.
And that's what happens here.
Mm-hmm.
And it's curious to think, because before I moved in here, I used to think America is the bully of the world. And why are American citizens not doing nothing? They're as shitty as their government. And then I move in here and I know and I see and I am in a dictatorship. And I was like, what am I doing? I moved to Brazil in the 70s. But it's silent, because like in Brazil in the 70s, I'm not that old, but I know stories. People were, I need to say that. Sorry. People were, if you were like sitting in a bar with a group of people talking, you were going to get arrested after a certain time. You were going to be arrested because you were conspiring against the government. Any group, forum, book club, whatever, it was seen as a communist threat. But, and that doesn't happen here. So, I mean, it happens with Black and brown people.
Yeah.
And then it's like, but they were shady, they were mean. Why they were doing that? There is like justification, which is racism, for these people to get killed, to get harassed by the police. So, and also there is the torture of migrant children in the border, the concentration camps, right? It's not, they are not American, they are illegals. So it doesn't hurt on me. And that's why I'm always like, Americans lack empathy, because my empathy is only to the group of people that I consider to be a group that deserves respect or whatever.
Yeah. I got you.
Well, yeah. Well, can I jump in real quick?
Sure.
Because I thought that's a really interesting point, and I think it really helps set the stage for the global situation and U.S. imperialism and how it affects working people everywhere and why it's so important to a general strike. I mean, the global situation right now is you have the United States supporting more than 70% of all so-called dictatorships around the world. Basically, governments that terrorize working people, which largely are utilizing U.S. weapons, U.S. Officials, U.S. paid officials, proxy wars, arms sales, you name it. The United States is doing that around the world. And then who does the United States target around the world? It's those governments and countries which are forging an independent path, which also happen to be paths which are largely pro-worker, largely paths which benefit working people in those countries. You guys talked about Nicaragua a little bit. In terms of the Sandinista revolution of 1979, Cuba being under starvation sanctions since 1960, the year after the socialist revolution there. You see all the saber rattling with China now, and China has just eliminated extreme poverty as of November 2020. While the United States imposes extreme poverty on the majority of the world, we have a situation in Afghanistan where the U.S. occupation has meant that in the next few years, it's likely that 90+% of people in Afghanistan are going to be living in extreme poverty. Right now, nearly 60% do. So that's the global situation. What's so important about that is, in how it's connected to race and how it's connected to class, is that what that scenario does is it creates, and I believe this situation exists in the United States too, it creates this ever-growing bottom of the working class, where workers in the United States, no matter how much the assault, how precarious, how desperate the assault becomes, the austerity, the cutbacks, the union busting, there's always a gaze abroad that the U.S. propaganda machine embeds into the consciousness of working people, which then says that Syria, China, Zimbabwe, wherever you're looking, that's a worse scenario. So at least what you have here is, even if it's bad, it's not like that. And that creates
Yeah.
an intense contradiction, which requires anyone who's in the class struggle, anyone who's organizing in the labor movement, to raise this question, because it has real dire domestic manifestations. Because as I said before, all of that funding that's going to the wars is literally what could be providing that base, that welfare state that people are fighting or wanting right now. All of these programs, that universal programs that are so popular right now, at least in terms of people's consciousness, all of that could be easily, with a fraction of the US military budget, be done tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
But the United States is not designed in that way, and it's about enhancing and intensifying that contradiction, so more and more folks understand that in the context of struggle, not just in conversation, but also in practice. And that's how our concrete practice in our workplaces, whatever we are doing in our media, propaganda, that is, I think, one of the most important roles that we play in terms of providing fuel for a general strike.
There is a complete dismantling of other countries, especially in the American continent, Central and South, right? The dismantling. The US goes and steal land, buy from the government. They're killing indigenous people. And there is the necessity of coming to America to actually try to survive by working here. So you have the creation of a workforce, the undocumented workforce. I've been in the undocumented workforce. I was undocumented for a while. That won't say anything, that will work quiet out of fear.
Yeah.
And that have the need to work nonstop. How many friends, how many times I worked sick because I had to work. There's no other option.
Yeah.
You have a complete workforce, which is like amounts for, I don't know, more than like maybe 50 or more than 50% of the workforce in this country that can't say nothing. And that don't take that cannot have also the advantage of the tax return, because we do pay taxes.
Yeah.
But we cannot have it's
It's interesting you bring that up too, because I have this book and it documents like all the different instances in which there was like nationalization of industries or companies within U.S. history. And I found it really interesting because the majority of instances of nationalization in U.S. history revolve around like wartime production, right? Oftentimes you have workers or even sometimes like company heads standing up and saying we deserve more for what we're producing, or we shouldn't have to work nonstop 7 days a week, whatever, during the wartime to try and like produce more stuff for these imperialist operations. And always in the name of imperialism and war, do they step in and say, you know what, if you don't want to produce, these goods or these products for this price, and we're going to pay you this much, then we're just going to literally take your company, nationalize your company. And if you try to strike, we're going to force you to come to work because we're going to make it illegal because we will have nationalized your company. So it's interesting you bring that up because, imperialism in more ways than one is a way that forces workers to, shut up and get in line and produce for, the lowest, the lowest, amount of like reciprocation as possible at the hands of the imperialists themselves.
Yeah. I just wanted to add into here because from what I've been gathering from the explanations, especially from Jackson, Danny, and Josana, and correct me on this if I'm incorrect, but it feels as if the United States, what it's doing, is trying to corner the market as far as labor is concerned. And it's kind of doing it in an inadvertent way. It's trying to use imperialism to extract the resources, but it also has an imperialistic, capitalistic benefit of extracting more workers from those areas to come into the United States and to be able to use that as cheap labor, aka slavery, within their systems, and then they can use those to be scabs for our unions. They can use them to pay them more of a slave's wage. So we're demanding $15, $20 an hour. Somebody who's undocumented may come in and say, I'll do it for cheaper because I just need to live. And so there's this nefarious plot by capitalistic forces to draw out more people for the sake of wage slavery from these different avenues, corners of the world, in order to have more wage slaves. And there's a second part to this that I wanted to bring up. Then on top of that, that also reinforces the powers of these capitalistic forces to influence the government to do more imperialism in other countries, which also makes those different capitalistic forces grow. They set foot into these other countries as power entities, also to influence their governments. And so, because of that, then they are able to inflict their will upon the governments in those localized areas, almost like capitalistic satellites. So it's like a octopus type uh, regime that spreads throughout the world to grab a hold of it, so that they can extract as many resources, not just from the environment, but as well as the society as a whole. So it feels like the worker solidarity question that I posed is so important, because when we fight the capitalistic forces here, we also need to fight those capitalistic forces abroad. Because just okay, my nerd's coming out, but if you watch any Marvel movie, you talk about Hydra, cut off one head, two more shall take its place. The same thing with capitalism. Cut off one head, two more shall take its place in other places abroad. So therefore, the worker solidarity has to be international, which is one of the reasons why I love when Nick has people for an international leftist coalition. That's a plug, by the way. But it means that that worker solidarity comes together so that we can defeat capitalism across the world, so that it won't be some segments of it left, like Ultron and Age of Ultron. You know what I mean?
Let me say this, James. I don't think it's going to happen without that. To be honest,
yeah.
like
Yeah.
if you guys think that we're going to challenge the U.S. empire with only 300 million people,
Yeah.
not going to happen.
Yeah.
So why
Yeah.
you guys think I'm reaching out? I'm gonna give you in Danny, and then we go Jackson after that. Why you guys think I've been reaching out to the Brazilian activists, the indigenous activists that Josana did the pledge or invite, introducing me to? I was having real conversation with these people. I want to invite people who are victims of the war crimes of the George Bush, Barack Obama, Joe Biden, Donald Trump administration. Same thing, right? U.S. empire. Because you're not gonna get things done unless you shut down the EU too. Unless you shut down the European allies that continue to help the United States. Unless you continue to put pressure on the entire neoliberal global establishment, nothing's gonna change.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I'm doing that. But anyway, sorry, I want to get Danny and Jackson back in. Anything you guys want to add?
Yeah, well, now these are all very good points. And I think it must be a critical feature. Solidarity, global solidarity has to be a critical feature of any working class program, any organization that claims to be fighting for the working class, anyone who claims to be wanting to create the conditions for a modern day general strike. They must have global solidarity on their agenda, because imperialism, what Lenin said about imperialism was it's the highest stage of capitalism, and it's the rule of finance and monopoly, and the intense socialization of labor. All of our labor is incredibly connected at this point. I mean that is what Karl Marx predicted as being the graveyard of capitalism, this socialization of labor. But what imperialism does is it intensifies what you were talking about, James, as the competition among workers. That's also a very critical piece to understand, is that as displacement from wars, as the precarious, as the working class, as this race to the bottom affects U.S. workers in its own particular way and affects the global working class in a more acute way, you have an increasing competition among workers, which fuels xenophobia, racism. It creates conditions for this. And this is what people like Joe Biden, this is what Hillary Clinton, this is what Donald Trump, this is what they thrive off of, right? This intense competition among workers. So it's really easy during a pandemic to say China did it, right? Because there has been a 30+ year campaign of blaming China for US deindustrialization, when in fact it was US corporations, which China was just one piece of it, but it was a global deindustrialization, which really did have its roots in US companies making a very rational decision to drive down wages and drive down working conditions for workers as a whole, especially in the United States. And it came as part of a large-scale deunionization campaign, which we're still feeling the effects of, right? And it comes off the heels of anti-labor laws, which are rooted in anti-communism, which is itself a form of racism, because anti-communism was wholly connected to the Black struggle for self-determination and to the anti-colonial movement abroad. It was all about naming anything communist which threatened the US-led capitalist
remember the
project.
MLK
That's
communist training schools?
Exactly. You had the Klan, right, posting, we're going to lynch the communists and Black folks. So that and constantly connecting the two, in part because the Communist Party was actually doing good work in around the Black struggle as well. But the point, I think, is that we need to have a global solidarity agenda. We need to have the opposition of sanctions, the opposition of all forms of U.S. intervention as part of a working class program, because that helps facilitate the solidarity which is required across nations to really bring down this imperialist albatross, which is in a really desperate position. I mean, there's a reason why even just our media gets attacked, right? Our media talking about this gets attacked. There's a reason why the algorithms continue to get pushed down. It becomes more difficult to talk about these things. It's because this empire, this capitalist system, has nowhere left to go. There is the reason why people are kicking and screaming for Medicare for all and not getting it is because the capitalists do not want to give it. They will not give it unless their powers taketh away. I mean, that's just how I see it. And so that's why it's so important to begin to strategize, map out the situation of workers in the United States, and arm workers with an internationalist worldview, so that I mean, the moment is now, but when the moment comes where that solidarity is materialized into real concrete action, we're prepared for it. And we know that U.S. wars are happening and happen all the time, and those are usually the moments where they're all the more critical.
Sorry, go ahead.
One of the things I just wanted to bring out was that, and I'll bring you in on this, Josanna, because I think it's a very important point, is that you're speaking about a larger point of that we're all connected around the world. And one of the things that I think is so important about a strike or a general strike is that the United States is basically a glass house now, because of the intersection of the internet and everybody being able to look in now and to see how things are from us, visualizing that out. And because of them being able to see what the United States is really like, now they're able to see that when we have things like a general strike, like for instance, what's going on in Massachusetts with the nurses, or what's going on in Michigan with Kellogg's and with John Deere, and in the Midwest, then that also could be a spark to others in other nations in order to see, hey, they're doing it in the United States. Number one, things aren't as jolly as in the United States as we thought they were. Number two, if they can do it there, imagine what we can do here in places like the global South, or in places they got it locked down in Europe for the most part. But they just imagine what can happen. Please, Josana.
I think I like what Danny was saying about the propaganda, because like they bring us here, and I'm speaking on behalf of all immigrants now. I'm joking. I'm speaking for myself. But my impression is like they bring us in and keep us separated.
Yeah.
Because within the groups, you have invite. And I was terrified to see and talking to JB yesterday about all this like Twitter fight, people just like attacking and everything. And I was like, it's so funny though, because like in South America, the organizers, the activists are actually like fighting for their freaking lives. There's no somebody going on a Twitter and cursing you. There's 2 or 3 like Bolsonaro people, but like, come on, these people are having their life threatened. Like they don't have time to go in a stream and be like, Nick sucks. They have a gun to their heads 24/7.
Yeah.
So when you're in the left and you were really in the left, you were really fighting for change, there's solidarity, there's support. And this is something that it's really rare to find in here, because you were raised in the imperialistic core of the world. So that imperialism idea of you need to win and win by yourself and conquer everything and be the boss is in your blood. It's in your veins. So you have, I had this experience when I first got here. I had Black people tell me I'm not Black because I'm Brazilian. So you erase the identity of a person the whole life because you were propagandized into being divided. And I remember, and it's so crazy because news from here, they don't spread that much, huh? The news that spread from here are the news that are like on CNN, Fox News. If they didn't make it to the media, the big corporate media, they won't spread. So I remember that I was organizing. The last one I organized was, long time ago, more than 10 years. We used to organize the Social World Summit. And I've never seen, I had people from Europe. I have people from the continent of Africa. I had people from Asia. I've never, ever seen one. I think Noam Chomsky maybe went in one, but I've never even seen one American person. One. You had people from everywhere. You probably had people from Mars, but not from the United States of America. Like,
Mars is my home.
There's no American organizers here. And I used to think that there's no American left after the Black Panthers party. Where is the American left? And then to discover that how we see, like, sometimes we like, oh, because the organizers from Europe, from France, Yellow Vest, but we don't even know. We are so propagandized that we don't even know there are active organizers in Somalia.
Wow.
That Somalia pirates are actually anarchists. They're taking back their power, but they are portrayed as gangsters that are hungry, stealing food. So we don't even... Go ahead, Nick. Sorry.
Oh, sorry, Josana. I thought you was done. I just want to highlight something you said, just to kind of give you guys a head to explain what Josana is talking about. And I'm sure they do this in Brazil as well. I'm sure they do. Where we had this idea about General Strike Summit, and then people was like, "Well, have you ever? Are you a union leader?" There was some dude that was like, "Yo, I organized unions for years. Who the fuck you think you are doing this?" You see what they did? You see how they turned leftism into a competition?
Yeah.
We have people pulling rank saying, "Oh, you are not good enough to spark a labor conversation." This is how pathetic the left in the United States is. And this is how much the CIA infiltration techniques have infected people's minds, where they are not even CIA. They're just doing the work of the CIA for them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyone got any thoughts?
Yeah. Well, does anyone want to jump in before me? Before I go, I just want to jump in on that because it's really important in the sense that, look, this long history of anti-communism, COINTELPRO, the counterintelligence program, this infiltration, it has a real impact. I mean, and now on these platforms where there is still a commodified kind of corporate culture. The algorithm is boosted through, attacks and not necessarily camaraderie discussion, right? like that is that's just a reality, and that's intentional. But I do think that there's a real materialist basis for this, in the sense that, you still have labor unions still sign, when you sign a labor, you have still some workers having to sign that they'll never join the Communist Party, right? Like, you have staff workers in unions having to sign such a thing, because the legacy of anti-communism is so real. And the fact that anyone could get angry at having a discussion about the ideas and the strategies necessary to organize something like this, because I don't think anyone has one answer for this, because the United States' particular situation is so complex and difficult and dire, and I think people are really feeling the urgency, and so I think that's why it's so good to talk about it. But personally, I've been in 3 different unions, and I've been a shop steward for all of them, and everything that we've talked about here always comes up in some form or another in the concrete work that you do. Like, if you are in any workplace, you are going to deal with race discrimination. You're going to deal with it, because bosses, they love that. They love to target Black workers. I had to deal with that all throughout the pandemic, where one of my colleagues was being constantly targeted for stuff that was happening across the agency, right? But I had to constantly, we both had to constantly work to fight unfair discipline, because the bosses were looking to squeeze us. They were looking to get us to do more with less. We were all, working from home or whatnot. We have fewer resources to do our job, but we're being asked to do more, and it was not really feasible. The same goes with, labor law right now excludes all supervisors from labor unions. And I was in a situation, this was like 7 years ago, where I was in negotiations with an agency that was literally about to shut its doors. Like a couple weeks after we signed a contract. It was devastating. I mean, it was like it was a community action program, one of the old war on poverty programs. And our supervisor was making less money than, not me, because I was not senior. But my colleague was making more money than her, and they had been at the agency for for around the same period of time, and she believed that it was a race issue, because she was an Afro Caribbean woman. She believed that this was racist, and she did not support the union because of that. And it created a really uncomfortable environment, where the supervisor felt like they were being robbed by us, right? And so that is something we're always dealing with. We're always dealing with these kind of divisions, and how to build unity around them. This is institutionalized, this is legalized, and it goes both in, it is significant both in how it manifests in our day-to-day struggles, and how it manifests in this world situation, where the United States is literally not just an empire in decline, but an empire in such a period of crisis that it is desperately attacking anyone and everything that it deems to be in its way, which creates the very things that you were talking about, Nick. These proxies, these forces who are willing to do the bidding of the state, whether they know it or not. I mean, some probably know it. A lot probably do not know that what they are doing actually benefits the state, or they do not care, which to me is the crassest form of opportunism. Like, you don't care because it benefits you. And there's always going to be a career for those who attack people on the left who are trying to have real discussion and real conversation around how we are going to organize ourselves out of this mess. There's always going to be a job for that, guaranteed.
Jackson, seems like you guys want to say something? You want to chime in?
Yeah, I want to second everything you said about these people who are either consciously or unconsciously, waging misinformation with, specific goals at hand. Like, if you like, we all deal in the online space, so we know who the actors are that are constantly attacking us, right? But if you think about it, the reasons why people like Hassan Piker, like Vaush, are so scared about the prospects of a general strike or general strike summit even are the same reasons why they're scared about people finding out the truth about what's happening in China or what's happening in Syria, for example, right? They don't want you to know the fact that in China right now, there is not a mass genocide happening with Uyghur people, right? In fact, those lies actually hurt Uyghur people who are trying to find some sort of like economic prosperity by working the jobs that they do. They don't want you to know the truth in Syria either. They want you to buy the imperialist myths surrounding Syria that Bashar al-Assad is like trying to destroy his own country or something like that, when in fact what they're doing is trying to regain control of their country from the extremists that the US has funded, and have taken over different parts of the country, and they're committing horrific acts against civilian populations. And what they're trying to do is rebuild their country. And that's why Dana Stroul, who's now working within the Biden administration as like a special envoy or something like that on Syria in particular, she has stated explicitly that the United States has taken over 1/3 of Syria with the help of the Kurds to secure the hydrocarbon rich region of the country, to cut off the Syrian people from vital resources that are, very important to the country's economy, like oil, natural gas, wheat, etc. And they don't want you to know this stuff because this is the truth. And that truth only brings further solidarity for working class people all across the world, right? And it's not that they're like directly necessarily benefiting from the same corporations that are funding these myths and these lies, but they just buy what the mainstream media tells them. And who funds the mainstream media? It is the military industrial complex. It is corporate America. It's all these companies that directly profit from the massive spending in the arms industry. So it's all interconnected.
The only thing I would say quickly, I'll pass it off, just to back up Jackson here, were all the people who repeated the lie about the Uyghur genocide. How many of those same people that he named did a stream when the corporate news in America admitted they lied about it? This was a few weeks ago. They admitted that there's not a genocide going on. How many of them made that correction?
Yeah.
Just ask yourself why. I'll pass it back to you. I'll pass it to the panel.
Yeah, well, that happened. The Associated Press, I believe that was nearly a month ago now, basically said that there was no genocide, that it was always an accusation that was not what. It's very interesting. It's an interesting read. It's kind of mind-numbing because while they are rolling back this narrative, they were also, of course, throwing in, well, it may not be genocide, but it's still really bad. I mean, I've been to that region. I was there in 2020, right at the beginning of 2020. And I can tell you it is actually not the situation that you hear in the media, right? People's lives in that region, in particular in Xinjiang province, have actually improved. And people will tell you that to your face, that it has improved. And this is coming from a country that has literally had generations of in their family live in extreme poverty. Like I don't think people understand that it wasn't until like the end of the 90s when China had any kind of industrial base, right? They began in the 70s, but it wasn't until the 90s when the industrialization of China, the urbanization, the ability to modernize the economy and then distribute resources accordingly was really possible. It was a majority rural, majority peasant background country, which prior to 1949, the vast majority of people were not living until the age of 40, right? They were dying before the age of 40. So telling Uyghurs or any person in China, because they always try to divide it, it's Uyghurs or it's Han or whatever it is, telling the 56 plus ethnic groups in China that they should dislike their government when they've seen their lives dramatically improve over the course of 2 generations is laughable, considering that in the United States, what has happened to the last several generations of working class people here? The exact opposite. We've seen a decline in living standards, an assault. It's why we're here today. We've seen an assault on our daily lives, on our ability to meet our needs. And this is the link that we need to make, that every time a country is trying to chart its own course of history, free from imperialism, that country is the one that you will hear about in the US propaganda machine, in the corporate media. And it's the one that will be, not exclusively, but will be receiving the brunt of the ire of the imperialist war machine.
Thank you very much for that. Oh, Kamali, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I wanted to, just because I know we're ending this stream soon. We got a couple minutes left here, and I was hoping to be on the panel today, but unfortunately, just took a little while to get back from the Massachusetts Nurses Association strikes out at St. Vincent's Hospital. But what I would like to do is just to at least run this clip, because I think that what Martin Luther King had to say here, it really just speaks to what this panel is all about, right? This panel is on imperialism, race, and labor. And so if we could just, if I could just play this clip for you real quick, it's a very short one. So
Sure.
Here you go. This is a not often seen Martin Luther King right here. So
I think we can offer our whole nation something, because there are three evils in our nation. It's not only racism, but economic exploitation of poverty would be one, and then militarism. And I think, in a sense, and in a very real sense, these three are tied inextricably together, and we aren't going to get rid of one without getting rid of the other.